Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the chilling true story of 14-year-old Trevor Lee, a teenager who called 911 from a church after committing an unthinkable act against his own parents in Middleburg, Florida, as reported by Clay County authorities. On August 5, 2025, at exactly 12:03 a.m., a 911 dispatcher in Clay County, Florida, received a call that would haunt them forever. The voice on the other end was young, calm, and carried words that no operator should ever have to hear. "I just killed my parents." The caller wasn't a stranger who had broken into a home. It wasn't a burglar caught in the act. It was 14-year-old Trevor Lee calling from the middle of a church sanctuary, asking the dispatcher to pray for him after committing the unthinkable. What could drive a straight-A student, described by everyone who knew him as funny and charismatic, to empty multiple rounds into the two people who loved him most? This is the story of a family that appeared perfect from the outside, but behind closed doors, something was building toward a breaking point that no one saw coming. Before we continue with the rest of this story, can I ask you for a quick favor? Please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. It's the best way to make sure you never miss our next gripping true crime release. Your support means the world and helps us keep uncovering stories just like this one. This is the story of David Lee, a devoted 44-year-old father, and Brandy Smith, his 45-year-old partner, who lived in the quiet suburban community of Middleburg, Florida. To everyone who knew them, they were the epitome of the American family dream. David was known for his dedication to his son's activities, regularly giving rides to practice and cheering from the sidelines. Brandy was described by her cousin James Lewis as a happy person, a good person all around, someone you'd always find laughing, joking, doing family things. Their home near Silver Point and County Road 220 was a gathering place for neighborhood kids. Trevor's best friend, Tyree Beeman, spent so much time there that David and Brandy told him repeatedly they loved him like a son. The house echoed with laughter, video games, and the sounds of teenage boys planning their next adventure. But what made this family truly special in the eyes of their community was Trevor himself. At just 14 years old, he was everything parents hope their children will be. A straight-A student with a bright future ahead of him. He played on the local football team, where his teammates knew him as someone who always brought good energy, good vibes. His best friend, Tyree, would later say, "They were probably the best or one of the best families I knew." Little did anyone know that beneath this picture-perfect exterior, something had been festering for years. Something that Brandy herself had tried to warn people about back in 2019. But what police investigators would discover in their digital forensics would send chills down their spines. In 2019, when Trevor was just 10 years old, Brandy had posted something on her Facebook page that now reads like a haunting prophecy. The post included a photo of young Trevor with an expression that some commenters found amusing, but Brandy's words were desperate. "This little boy gives me pure hell. Everything I did to my parents, I am getting it back times 10. Y'all keep us lifted up in prayer." The responses from friends and family in 2019 reveal a community that saw this as typical parenting struggles. Talia commented, "Yep, been there, done that. Damn, probably still do. Just the natural way of life." Rose Robb offered spiritual guidance. "God's blessing will be with you both." Others laughed it off with comments like, "They say what goes around comes around," and "Mama always told me, I hope you have one just like you one day." What none of them realized was that Brandy wasn't just venting about typical teenage rebellion. She was reaching out for help, asking for prayers, trying to tell people that something was seriously wrong. The phrase "pure hell" would take on a terrifying new meaning 6 years later. Trevor's behavior at 10 years old was already concerning enough that his mother felt compelled to ask an entire social media network to keep them lifted up in prayer. But everyone dismissed it as normal childhood defiance. Even Angela Taylor commented on Trevor's facial expression in the photo, saying, "Look at his expression, I love it. Hey Trevor, LOL." That expression, captured in 2019, now serves as a chilling reminder that the warning signs were all along.
By the summer of 2025, those who knew the Lee family would have sworn things had improved dramatically. Trevor was about to start high school. His grades were excellent, and he seemed to have matured into the kind of teenager every parent dreams of raising. Just 3 days before the tragedy, on Friday, August 2nd, everything seemed normal. David Lee had picked up Kyrie Beeman and given him a ride to and from football practice alongside Trevor, just like he had done countless times before. "They treated me well. They told me they loved me like a son, and they treated me as such," Beeman would later recall about that final normal day with the family. The weekend of August 3rd and 4th passed without incident, or so it seemed from the outside. Neighbors heard no screaming, no fighting, no indication that Sunday night would be different from any other night in the quiet Middleburg neighborhood. David and Brandy went about their usual routines, probably planning for Trevor's first day of high school just days away. But investigators would later discover that Sunday night, August 4th, something changed. An argument erupted between Trevor and his parents, an argument that would escalate beyond anything this family had experienced before. However, what police found next would change everything about how they understood this seemingly perfect family.
At approximately 11:30 p.m. on Sunday, August 4th, 2025, something triggered an argument in the Lee household. Sheriff Michelle Cook would later reveal that this wasn't just a typical teenage disagreement about curfew or chores. Whatever was said between Trevor and his parents that night created a perfect storm of emotions that had been building for years. Just after midnight on Monday, August 5th, neighbors in the quiet Middleburg subdivision were fast asleep. The houses along Silver Point and County Road 220 sat in peaceful darkness, their residents having no idea that just yards away, a family was about to be destroyed forever. Inside the Lee home, Trevor made a decision that would haunt everyone who knew them. He retrieved his parents' gun, the very weapon David and Brandy kept in their home for protection, and walked into their bedroom where they lay sleeping. What happened next can only be described as execution-style killings. Trevor fired multiple rounds into both David and Brandy as they lay in their bed. The sound of gunshots shattered the night air, but somehow, incredibly, none of the neighbors reported hearing anything. Shell casings scattered across the bedroom floor as Trevor's parents died instantly from their wounds. But what Trevor did immediately after the shooting would puzzle investigators and profilers for months to come.
At exactly 12:03 a.m., Trevor calmly set down the smoking gun, walked out of his house, and began a journey that would end a mile away at Cross Point Church on Fleming Island. As he walked through the dark streets carrying his backpack, his parents lay dead in pools of blood behind him. When Trevor reached the church, he didn't try to hide. He didn't attempt to flee the state or cover up his crime. Instead, he walked to the center of the sanctuary, threw his backpack away from him, emptied his pockets, and pulled out his phone to make the most bone-chilling 911 call in Clay County history. "I need to pray," Trevor told the dispatcher in a voice that was disturbingly calm for someone who had just committed double murder. The 911 operator, trained to handle emergencies but never anything quite like this, listened as Trevor confessed to shooting his parents. Most of the call remains redacted due to the ongoing investigation. But what we do know is that Trevor told the dispatcher exactly where to find David and Brandy's bodies, and that he would wait peacefully for arrest. Then, Trevor made a request that still gives investigators chills. He asked the 911 operator to pray with him. "I will definitely be praying for you, son," the operator responded, somehow maintaining their composure while listening to a child confess to matricide and patricide. For 10 agonizing minutes, the operator kept Trevor on the line, probably saving lives by ensuring he didn't change his mind about surrendering peacefully. At 3:48 a.m., deputies found Trevor exactly where he said he'd be, sitting in the middle of Cross Point Church, hands raised, ready to face the consequences of what he'd done.
When Clay County deputies arrived at the Lee home, they encountered a scene that veteran investigators would later describe as one of the most disturbing they'd ever witnessed. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air, mixing with something far worse. David Lee and Brandy Smythe were found in their bedroom, their bodies riddled with multiple gunshot wounds. The forensics team counted several spent shell casings scattered around the room, indicating that Trevor had fired repeatedly at his parents. The pattern of wounds suggested the killings were deliberate and methodical, not the result of a momentary loss of control, but a calculated execution. The murder weapon, as Sheriff Cook confirmed, belonged to David and Brandy themselves. It was the gun they had purchased to protect their family, now used by their own son to destroy it. Trevor had left it behind when he walked to the church, making no attempt to hide the evidence or cover his tracks. What struck investigators most was the complete absence of any signs of struggle. David and Brandy appeared to have been killed while they slept, suggesting they trusted Trevor enough to never suspect he might harm them. There were no defensive wounds, no signs they had tried to flee or fight back. They died believing their son loved them. But what investigators discovered next would reveal that this wasn't a crime of passion, it was something much more calculated and disturbing. As detectives processed the crime scene, they began piecing together the events leading up to the murders. The preliminary investigation revealed that the argument on Sunday night had been the catalyst. But what was it about? What could have been so severe that it drove a 14-year-old to murder? Sheriff Michelle Cook announced that investigators were diving deep into Trevor's mental health history and school records. They needed to understand how a straight-A student with no criminal record could commit such a heinous act. The investigation would take them through years of medical records, school counselor reports, and social media posts that painted a very different picture of the perfect family. Meanwhile, the community was reeling. Middleburg is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where families feel safe leaving their doors unlocked. The idea that such a brutal crime could happen there, and be committed by a child no less, shattered the community's sense of security forever. "My heart breaks for that little boy," neighbor Seth Myers would later say. Obviously tragic incident. For it to get to that point where he felt like it was the only option he had is the saddest thing you could possibly think of. But perhaps the most telling investigation came from digging into social media posts and family dynamics that friends and neighbors had dismissed for years. However, the killer made one crucial mistake. He left behind a digital trail that revealed the truth about his relationship with his parents. As investigators dug deeper into the family's history, they uncovered a pattern of concerning behavior that stretched back years. That 2019 Facebook post from Brandy wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of cries for help that the community had ignored or dismissed. Friends and family members began coming forward with stories they had previously kept private. Some admitted they had noticed Trevor could be manipulative and had a temper that seemed disproportionate to typical teenage behavior. Others recalled incidents where Brandy had seemed stressed or overwhelmed when dealing with her son, but they had attributed it to normal parenting challenges. The investigation revealed that Trevor's behavioral issues at school had been escalating in recent months. Teachers reported that while his grades remained high, his interactions with classmates and authority figures had become increasingly problematic. There were incidents of verbal aggression, threats, and a concerning lack of remorse or emotional connection to his victims. Just when investigators thought they had their answer, a new witness came forward with information that flipped the case upside down.
Kyrie Beeman, Trevor's best friend since elementary school, held the key to understanding what really happened that Sunday night. In multiple interviews with investigators and media, Beeman revealed details about his final conversation with Trevor that painted a chilling picture of premeditation. "He told me he loved me, and he told me he was calling to say goodnight." Beeman recalled about the call he received around midnight, the same time Trevor was either preparing to kill his parents or had just finished doing so. But what Beeman didn't initially tell investigators was the content of conversations he and Trevor had been having in the weeks leading up to the murders. Trevor had been expressing increasingly violent thoughts about his parents, complaining that they were controlling and that he couldn't wait to be free of them. Beeman, being just 14 years old himself, didn't understand that these weren't typical teenage complaints. He didn't realize that his best friend was planning something unthinkable. The guilt of not reporting these conversations would haunt Beeman for the rest of his life. "The Trevor that did this, I don't know that Trevor," Beeman would later say, struggling to reconcile the friend he thought he knew with the cold-blooded killer Trevor had become. "I pray that the Trevor that did this died last night." However, what Beeman revealed next would show that the Trevor who committed murder had always been there, hidden beneath a carefully constructed facade. The person responsible was someone nobody suspected, but the truth was more twisted than anyone imagined. Through extensive interviews with friends, family, and school personnel, a disturbing picture emerged of Trevor Lee as a master manipulator who had fooled everyone around him. The straight-A student and great kid that everyone described was actually a carefully constructed persona designed to hide his true nature.
Child psychologists who reviewed the case identified classic signs of conduct disorder and possible antisocial personality traits that had been present from an early age. The behavioral problems Brandy had posted about in 2019 weren't typical childhood defiance. They were early indicators of a serious psychological disorder that would eventually manifest in the ultimate act of violence against his own parents. Trevor had learned to present different versions of himself to different people. To his best friend, he was funny and charismatic. To his teachers, he was studious and well-behaved. To his parents' friends, he was the perfect son. But behind closed doors, David and Brandy were living with a child who was increasingly difficult to control and potentially dangerous. The argument on Sunday night, August 4th, wasn't about typical teenage issues. According to the investigation, it centered around Trevor's increasingly aggressive behavior and his parents' attempts to get him professional help. David and Brandy had finally recognized that their son needed intervention, and they had scheduled appointments with mental health professionals for the following week. Trevor's response to learning about these plans was swift and brutal. Rather than accept help, he chose to eliminate the problem: his parents.
In the days following the arrest, the Middleburg community struggled to process what had happened. Cross Point Church, where Trevor had surrendered, became an impromptu memorial site where residents left flowers and said prayers for David and Brandy. Quote, "They were the best, or one of the best families I knew," Kyrie Beeman told reporters, his voice breaking as he stood outside the house where his second family had been murdered. "They were funny, and they treated me well. They told me they loved me like a son, and they treated me as such." James Lewis, Brandy's cousin, echoed the community's bewilderment. "I guess we'll never know what caused him to do it because, like I said, he had good parents. So for him to do that, we don't know why." But perhaps they did know why, and they just hadn't wanted to see it. The warning signs had been there all along. In Brandy's desperate Facebook post asking for prayers, in the concerning behavioral reports from school, in the subtle signs that something was seriously wrong in the Lee household. Sheriff Michelle Cook announced that there was no ongoing threat to the community, but residents weren't so sure. If a child could murder his own parents in their sleep, what other horrors might be lurking behind the closed doors of their neighbors' homes?
Trevor Lee was charged as a juvenile with 2 counts of second-degree murder, though prosecutors hinted that they might seek to have him tried as an adult given the brutal nature of the crimes. The question of whether a 14-year-old could fully understand the consequences of his actions would become central to the legal proceedings. The case raised uncomfortable questions about juvenile justice, mental health intervention, and the responsibility of communities to recognize and respond to warning signs. How many other Trevor Lees were out there, hiding behind masks of normalcy while planning unspeakable acts? Child advocacy groups pointed to the case as an example of why early intervention is crucial when dealing with behavioral problems in children. If Trevor had received appropriate mental health treatment when Brandy first posted about his concerning behavior in 2019, would David and Brandy still be alive? The legal system would now have to grapple with these questions while determining Trevor's fate.
Today, residents of Middleburg still lock their doors a little tighter, and parents pay closer attention to their children's behavior. The illusion that tragedy only happens to other families in other places has been shattered forever. The house where David Lee and Brandy Smith were murdered stands as a stark reminder that evil can exist anywhere, even in the most seemingly perfect families.
Neighbors avoid walking past it, and the "for sale" sign in the yard remains untouched. Nobody wants to live in a house where such horror occurred. Kyrie Beamon continues to grapple with the loss of his second family and the betrayal by his best friend. "I don't want him to be known as a killer or murderer," he said in one of his final interviews about the case. "He was a great kid, great son, and great brother." But the reality is that Trevor Lee will forever be known as the 14-year-old who walked to church after murdering his parents and asked a 911 operator to pray for him. His case has become a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing warning signs and the devastating consequences when mental health issues go untreated. The questions that haunt investigators, the community, and Trevor's surviving friends and family may never be fully answered. How does a child reach the point where murdering his parents seems like a reasonable solution to his problems? What could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy?
As Trevor Lee sits in a juvenile detention facility, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison, those questions continue to echo through the quiet streets of Middleburg, Florida, a community forever changed by one night of unthinkable violence and a child's choice to destroy the family that loved him most. The case serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators aren't always strangers lurking in dark alleys. Sometimes they're sleeping in the bedroom down the hall, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true nature. To this day, when residents of Middleburg hear about family arguments or see posts from parents asking for prayers about their difficult children, they remember Brandy Smith's words from 2019, "Y'all keep us lifted up in prayer." They remember how the community failed to hear her desperate plea for help, and they wonder, could we have saved them all? If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping true crime stories. And most importantly, turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll be the first to know whenever we release a new case. Your support helps us keep bringing you these powerful stories, and turning on notifications ensures you never miss a single update.